Hello, everyone. My name is Brittany Elkins. I am the program manager at the MLBC Continuum, and I am joined today by Ms. Adriane Johnson-Williams. Ms. Johnson-Williams is a native Memphian who got her start in Memphis City schools and is dedicated to improving the lives of Black and Brown people in her hometown and across the nation. Dr. Adriane Johnson-Williams is founder and principal at Standpoint Consulting. Dr. Johnson Williams is currently board chair and co-founder of Whole Child Strategies, Inc., an organization seeking to center the lived experiences of people and communities seeking solutions to challenges facing families and children and limiting the educational opportunities of children and youth. She also serves on the board of Beloved Community, a nonprofit consulting firm focused on implementing regional sustainable solutions for diversity, equity, and inclusion. She was named a 2021 Superwoman in Business by the Memphis Business Journal and 2020 Woman of the Year by Girls Inc. of Memphis. She received the Evelyn S. Field Award from Sister Reach for demonstrating, reproductive justice at the intersections. Thank you, Dr. Johnson Williams, for joining us today. To all the attendees, you're in for a treat. Dr. Johnson Williams is an amazing woman, and I know that you're going to take away some great insight from her. And now I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Johnson Williams. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I am really looking forward to this opportunity to talk to you about emotional intelligence. The title of the session is probably very intriguing because this idea that COVID-19 could have contributed in any way to increased empathy, stress management, or optimism is probably a little shocking. And so the way I'd like for you to think about it is that emotional intelligence got a boost this last year in terms of people understanding that it mattered. And so what you were able to see in many places is a greater display of emotional intelligence skills. Unfortunately, you were also able to see a lesser display of these skills in many settings. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is a little bit about me, and then we're going to get into some things around what emotional intelligence is and why it matters. So Standpoint Consulting is a management consulting firm. In addition to supporting organizations in becoming more effective, we also support organizational collaborative efforts. But specific to this topic today, we provide training and executive coaching in emotional intelligence and the Myers-Briggs type indicator. I have a background in quantitative and qualitative research, the sociology of organizations, and results-based accountability. I really do welcome you to engage actively in this session, and feel free to ask questions and engage in whatever way you like, and we will do our best to keep up with your questions and comments. So first, I'm going to talk to you about what emotional intelligence is, this idea of EQ versus IQ. And then I'm also going to talk about why it matters and how you go about increasing it. So the definition that MHS, which is the place where I use the EQI 2.0 assessment for my practice, they describe emotional intelligence as a set of emotional and social skills. So it's important to recognize that IQ is often thought of as this kind of innate capacity that we have that doesn't really change over our lifetimes. It's very debatable, but that is often the way that people talk about IQ. EQ is really a set of skills. It's not innate, and every aspect can be grown or developed. But so the skills are the way we perceive and express ourselves, the way we develop and maintain social relationships, the way we cope with challenges, and how we use emotional information effectively. Emotional intelligence is measured using the EQI 2.0. There are other assessments, but I'm talking specifically about the assessment that I use. There are 5 scales, and you see them here. There are 15 subscales, and there's a well-being indicator. The well-being indicator is called the happiness score, and it consists of self-regard, optimism, interpersonal relationships, and self-actualization, which exist throughout the subscales. So let's talk about why EQ mattered in 2020. We had both a global pandemic and a racial uprising. The global pandemic really plagued literally the planet with sickness and death. There was extensive economic disruption, and there was quite a bit of workforce displacement, meaning that, for instance, people like me who already work from home, our lives didn't change that much, but quite a few other people were displaced. Healthcare workers were under a great deal of stress, and people were struggling to find a way to maintain their place in the economy. At the same time, there was a racial uprising, and we had lots of protests, massive protests, a great deal of interpersonal stress, which if you are someone who pays attention to what goes on social media, there was a lot of arguing probably and all sorts of things going on with interpersonal stress. And there was a general rejection of systemic norms. So there are a lot of things about how people of various racial groups interact with institutions in the United States. And there was a general rejection of those expectations. Many of the examples are the ongoing rejection of what does professional hair look like? Those kinds of what seem to be trivial things, which are actually fundamental to people's identity. And so the things that came to bear for people and leaders who were successful during this time, successful at maintaining healthy teams, at maintaining healthy productivity on teams, it was because of these 9 subscales. Clearly, all the subscales matter. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how the measurement works and kind of paint a picture of how these skills work together. So if you were to take an assessment, you would get an overall EQ score, and then you would get individual scores for each subscale, each scale and each subscale. There is a level, right? There's a number that you can reach, but really what's probably more important than the number itself is the balance among the skills, because you can have too much of a skill and too little of a companion skill and still be not effective as a leader. So let's think about it this way. You now have a team that's working all over the place. You have many of your team members who have children. They're also in school, and everybody's restricted to somewhere around 1,000 to 1,200 square feet on average. And so what does that mean for your workers? What does it mean for your team and your colleagues? An emotional intelligent leader would be keenly aware of what it means for themselves, right? They would know what kind of stress they were under and how they were expressing their stress, right? So they would be able to give considerable thought to how they were showing up. But then they would also be aware of the fact that a lot of things are happening in the world right now. And so we have to have a better sense of social responsibility to be able to support each other and to understand that what's happening for people in a given workplace is just that workplace, that there are people who are living in the world and perhaps struggling with some other things. And that, of course, is also related to empathy. As a decision maker, it's going to be even more important to manage our impulses and not let our emotions carry us in decision making, and instead engage in problem solving. That's very deliberate. And because this is a very stressful time, an effective emotional leader doesn't have the word should in their vocabulary, because they understand they have to be flexible, and they understand that things are or are not in a given time, and they understand that they need to figure out how to manage their stress effectively and be optimistic about what's possible. So people in 2020, leaders in 2020 who were able to do this were more effective. And you likely heard about those people in your own environment. You heard about the people who, the companies who gave people unlimited leave and who stopped counting kind of family leave time or sick leave. The people who let people work whenever they could and take time to support their families. The people who figured out the best pathway to still getting the work done that didn't push their people out the door. And so those were emotional intelligence leaders. Emotional intelligence is connected not just with better performance as an individual, but better performance as a leader of a team. It is also indicative of greater resilience and, quite frankly, just better relationships. So let's think about why EQ still matters, because 2020 is over. We're halfway through 2021, and we're still in the middle of a global pandemic. We're still in the middle of economic disruption, and our workforce displacement challenges are even more significant because now we're thinking about labor force reductions. And so what I mean by that is there's a lot of discussion about people not wanting to come to work or take jobs, or there being shortages. And the discussion around that particular dynamic can reveal a great deal about a person's emotional intelligence. One of the things to think about when we think about labor force reduction is that about 180,000 people who would have been in the workforce actually died during the pandemic. Then there are another substantial amount who were significantly ill and still recovering. And then there are a lot of people who were considered essential during during the pandemic, who never reaped the economic benefits that matched their title, and are now thinking about other ways they can engage in the workforce. And one thing that I've noticed a great deal of is that those emotional intelligent leaders, leaders of companies, leaders of corporations that recognize that people were able to live their lives differently and perhaps in ways that they preferred when they worked from home, those leaders are not struggling with the same kind of labor force disruption as people who are going to be more dogmatic about what it means to work. So people who lack flexibility and empathy are going to find it hard to find staff. In terms of the racial uprising, the calls for race equity are also going to continue, because there are very specific expectations of government and business after this last year. The interpersonal stress that happened online is going to show up again in the workplace as people get back to work, and probably already showed up in the workplace, with expectations of people's humanity being respected, either for the first time or in a better way. And this ongoing rejection of some systemic norms around race in government and business. And so how will people do this? Oddly enough, it is exactly the same skill set. People are going to have to understand leaders are going to have to understand how they are showing up in the workplace. They're going to have to think about their levels of empathy and where it is they stand on issues of social responsibility, because that social responsibility skill is critical to being able to deal particularly with the calls for race equity. I want to talk a little bit about what empathy looks like in other ways, because I think we talk about it a lot, but I don't know that people fully understand what it means. Um, and I will self-disclose a bit. When I first took my EQI 2.0 assessment, I scored very well on the leadership scale for emotional intelligence, but I scored very poorly on optimism and empathy, which is to say, there are different ways to get to the overall high score, and it's not always the best mix of things. I learned from my first ever, well, not my first ever, but my a recent young woman who's reported to me at the time, who is now my senior associate, that there were some things that I could do better in terms of being empathetic. And those things include being able to acknowledge that while we're all focused on an outcome, we're only going to be as successful as the whole team, right? So I needed to not just focus on the things that we needed to do to be better, but I needed to reassure her and other people on the team that of the things that they were doing well. I needed to understand what they needed and give it to them. So I needed to show greater appreciation for what they were doing. I needed to give people opportunities to express what additional needs they had in order to be successful. I needed to take a pause occasionally and allow for a moment of work avoidance, and not always focused on the result, the result, the result. And oddly enough, when you do those things and show greater empathy and greater flexibility, the results are actually better. I really encourage you to kind of go out and check out some of the research on emotional intelligence, and you'll find that a lot of the ways that we think about effective leadership, really in the past, different models of effective leadership, the very clear, strong-willed male leader who pushed people to their limits, actually reduces productivity and effectiveness instead of increasing it. So what does this mean for what it is you do to increase your EQ? There are a couple of things. There is your individual assessment. You can assess yourself or get yourself assessed, because you have to get access to these assessments. And you can get a self-report, but you can also get a 360 report of your emotional intelligence. And the best way to do the individual work is really through individual coaching. If you want to do work with a team, the same self-assessment reports are effective. You can also do EQ 360s for a team of leaders. And there's also something that allows you to measure your team's EQ. So how much emotional intelligence is present for you as a team, if you were to think about it, your team as kind of an individual. And then there's group training and group coaching. I would recommend that you look at a couple of additional things to read if you want to learn more, if you're a reader. Daniel Goleman, I believe we can credit with popularizing emotional intelligence for people who are outside of the fields of psychology and leadership development. There's also this book called The EQ Edge, which really helps you to understand the relationship between EQ and your personal success and your success as a leader. And then there's Brene Brown's Dare to Lead, which you've probably heard a great deal about if you're paying attention to kind of leadership development and personal development. And while Brene Brown doesn't speak specifically about emotional intelligence, her book really aligns with what we know about emotional intelligence. So before I go on, I'm going to go back here and see if there are any questions about what EQ is and how you go about using it or understanding it. So I'm going to give people a moment to see if you want to add any questions to the Q&A, or even if you want to, I think I can see if you raise your hand or something. Can you do that? If there's something else you specifically want to know. So I'm going to take a pause and give people a chance to post questions. It looks like I have done a masterclass in emotional intelligence because it doesn't seem like people have any questions. Fortunately, I come prepared with additional examples. So one of the things I want to point out in this model is that, again, the scales and subscales that you would be pay attention to if you were assessed or if your team is assessed, it's not always about the overall score. It really is about the balance. What we know about emotional intelligence is that impulse control is one of the subscales that will derail leadership. So you can be incredibly effective and or have really high scores in self-perception and self-expression. But if you lack impulse control, then you are going to have a problem leading. So the idea is that not any one of these things is sufficient to build up, but you need to determine what is the balance that's right for you. As I said earlier, I had very low empathy scores and very low optimism scores, but I had really high scores in self-perception and self-expression. What I had to do was learn to kind of tone down some of the self-expression, so some of the assertiveness, and turn up some of the empathy so that I could make space for my team members and the people who reported to me to show up better. And so I've learned how to, basically I tell people it's about kind of how you turn the dials on emotional intelligence skills more than just trying to really increase your scores. The other thing I wanted to go back to in the presentation was about this particular subset of skills that I think really helped people to be successful this last year and will help people to be successful moving forward. Mind you, all of the subscales matter, but I think this set of skills is particularly important. And so I'm going to slow down and go through them a little bit more, much like I did with the prior example. So emotional self-awareness is really the ability to understand what is leading to your emotional, what you're leading to your feelings at any given moment. So it's not just like I feel happy today, or I'm a little disgusted today. No, it's more about why. What is happening around you that is making you feel the way you feel? And how do you understand how to manage that? That is the kind of your first little check mark. And how you manage that, how that then feeds into everything else, then brings in the other skills. Emotional expression is also, now you have this feeling of disgust. And if your team has done something that's particularly bad, the question is, do you show up and say, I'm disgusted? Or do you find another way to express your emotions that will not derail your ability to get work done or derail your work with your team? On the interpersonal components, which are going to continue to be, well, they're always important, but when you have the environment we have now, particularly in the United States, and I would argue around the world, but right now in the United States, this issue of social responsibility and how much of a connection you have to what's going on in the world um, can be a real stumbling block. If there isn't an understanding that the people in your work environment, on your team, are not just part of your team, but they exist in the world as full human beings, and that what they care about is something you might want to care about. One of the ways that this shows up actually in some kind of corporate environments is the addition of all sorts of volunteer opportunities for employees. The idea of corporate social responsibility isn't necessarily about corporate responsibility as much as it's about marketing on one hand, but also making sure that employees feel that the place that they work cares about what they care about. And so that is kind of an organizational example of this social responsibility um, scale, subscale. At an individual level, or if you have smaller teams, what that looks like is giving people room to do the things they need to do to engage in the world. One example is during times where um, people were doing a lot of protesting or engaging in all sorts of activism, leaders had a choice about whether to penalize their employees for their involvement or give people room to do that. And that the giving people room took a level of emotional intelligence, because even if you disagree with the approach, the idea is, in a time of that kind of social unrest, is it more important that you have team members or employees who feel like you respect them as human beings? Or is it more important just for you to have people in front of their computers doing their work? And I can assure you that the people who were more pressed to get people to do what they're supposed to be doing, what they should be doing, those people probably lost credibility with their employees, but also lost employees. And we're seeing a lot of that movement happening right now. Again, with decision making and kind of this impulse control problem solving pair. The decision making in emotional intelligence isn't just about your ability to make decisions, it's about your ability to make decisions when emotions are involved, when things are heated, or when there's a sense of loss or conflict around decisions. Your ability to marshal your intelligence, your emotional intelligence, to dig in and understand how much time to take to make the decision, which is around that impulse control part, but also how to understand how to define the problem and seek out solutions is fundamentally important in emotional intelligence. One of the another line of work which you might want to look into is the concept of adaptive leadership. In adaptive leadership, the issue of finding problems that are complex, that are not easily solved, it takes great emotional intelligence to bring together people and help them to understand how to solve the problem for themselves. Because those more complex problems, one person may not have the expertise to do, but it takes emotional intelligence to be able to say, I, as a leader, am not the person who's going to solve this problem. I am not equipped to solve it. But what we can do is come together as a group and figure out the best way to move forward. Being having humility and understanding that expertise is limited, and that there are people in your team who may know more than you do about how to address an issue or how to take on a leadership role. That requires emotionally intelligent leadership, because it requires people to have a great deal of self-confidence and self-regard, and enough knowledge about who they are and how they show up in the world not to be threatened by other people. And finally, this issue of stress management, to go a little bit more deeply into that. These are very stressful times. The economy is still very much disrupted. It is capital is flowing very rapidly in some directions and not at all in others. And again, people are finding it hard to find people who will work without proper compensation. So it's not about people not willing to work. It's about people understanding now kind of what the worth is, what their worth is. And so being able to manage these stressors will absolutely require a level of flexibility that some people are just not prepared for. There are ways of paradigms of how we go about our work and how we go about leadership that are deeply challenged in this moment. And the ability to just kind of put everything on the table and figure out if there's a different pathway forward, that is a critical capacity right now. Stress tolerance is one of those things that some people think is actually innate. Stress tolerance is not innate. We are not born as more resilient people than others. Grit is often confused for this kind of thing, because grit is not malleable. You either have it or you don't, and it's very hard to get more grit. And I'm fascinated by the fact that people talk about it as if you can gain it. You really can't, but you can become more stress tolerant. You can learn what you need to learn to be able to not let stress overwhelm you, and take care of your kind of emotional and psychological self to be more able to function under high periods of stress. And optimism, I'm going to tell you, my score has never gone up in optimism. So even though I have quite a, I pride myself on being an emotionally intelligent leader, optimism is not my strong suit. And so what I have kind of an overabundance of is what's called reality testing, which is a part of decision making. And that makes it difficult for me to be optimistic, because I talk about what reality is a lot, and it's hard to see past what is. One of the ways I manage that is I make sure I have optimistic people on my team and in my social circle to help balance that out. So again, you have your own individual emotional intelligence, but you also have the capacity to build emotional intelligence as an organization, as a team. And that's where you are able to turn up or turn down skill sets by putting people together, so that teams are also emotionally intelligent entities. So that really is all I have today. And if you would like to know more about this, you can visit our website, email us at talktous@standpointconsulting.com. You can find us on LinkedIn or Facebook. But I really would like it very much if I could answer some of your questions or learn more about why it is you came to participate in this session. So please ask questions.
Hi, Adriane. So I would love to know more about some of the services Standpoint Consulting provides to their clients. Maybe that can give some more people some insight. I know we have a shy bunch. But no
Yes.
worries. We'll definitely, I'll pose some questions because I'm definitely curious to know,
Mhm,
what are some solutions? And then my part two, is there anything that our guests can implement today or in the next month or so
mhm, mhm.
when it comes to emotional intelligence, whether
Yes.
that is the perception of themselves and self
Mhm,
testing and
mhm,
making sure and figuring out what areas they need to improve in or need support in. So that's my two part, and I'm gonna hush now.
mhm. Yes. Well, I also saw a question pop up from Rod Stanhope. Could I discuss optimism and empathy as they relate to EQ? So yes, the empathy, well, we do talk about people have a sense of what empathy is. But empathy is the ability to understand what's happening with other people and walk alongside them in that. As a leader, that means the example I gave earlier about understanding who your team is, who your colleagues are, and what's going on with them and what they need in the moment to help them be successful, and being able to show up and provide that for them. In the current context, some of that empathy really has come down to parenting. A great deal of empathy has had to show up in our professional environment when it comes to parenting. I have to say, I've had a lot of clients where we just had to have a little moment sometimes at the beginning of meetings for people to check in about the fact that their children are driving them crazy and they may run in and out of the meeting. And please don't disrespect me because I have out of control children, right? And so I can't, as a kind of consultant, I of course was not going to judge my clients, but as a coach, one of the things I help people understand is it's okay to ask for grace. And if you are a good leader, you're going to offer it. You're going to be really able to understand that there is nothing, if things are out of people's control, you have to let people show up as they can right then. Um, Optimism, one of the reasons why optimism um, shows up is that it's hard to lead people if you can't set a vision and you can't support people in recognizing that they can reach the vision. So, optimism is fundamental to leadership in regards to visioning, vision casting, and getting buy in from people. I have to say, in my own situation, my struggle with optimism is balanced by, I said, reality testing and my ability to be very rational about how we get from point A to point B, but having optimistic people on the team really does help. To your question, Brittany, about what we do and what people can do. So, when it comes to leadership development, emotional intelligence, and Myers Briggs, we do provide training. We provide individual coaching. So, most of my clients are executives who I've taken through an EQ 360 process, and we go through an arc where we help them to understand how they want to improve their skills and what techniques they can use to improve their skills, and we test things out, um, and um, and we kind of tweak things along the way. And so that is that is what I specialize in. I have a colleague who does the Myers-Briggs work, where we do teamwork and train teams on how to work effectively using their Myers-Briggs. In terms of what you could do today, I I really think well, I know for a fact that assessment is the way to go if you really want to understand what your EQ is and how to take advantage of um, the capacities that you have and grow in the areas you need to grow. But there are a couple of things that you could do even now to think through some of the most important aspects. Impulse control. Impulse control is a deal breaker. It is part of one of the main derailers for leaders. And one of the things to be done is that if there's a situation that is emotional in nature, um, one of the ways to check on your impulse control and check yourself is really to pause, right? So you pause, Breathing is one of those things that people don't understand. Like, we do it naturally, but we don't do it well. So we have to pause and really take a couple of good clearing breaths, and then put the thing down and come back to it, right? Most of the things that we react to and respond to impulsively when challenges come up don't have to be dealt with in that moment. Even if something is pressing and must be dealt with today, it can be dealt with in 15 minutes probably, as opposed to right now. So that's one thing, that it is an emotionally intelligent choice to take a deep breath and not make a decision without pausing to think about it and feel what you're feeling, so that you don't react just out of impulse and just to deal with an emotional response. So that's one thing. Another thing to do, particularly when it comes to empathy, is if you have a team, to just ask them, what is it that's helping them to be successful right now? And what would help them to be more successful? And listen. And if you hear what people are saying and you are kind of like, well, that sounds ridiculous, then you want to think about, okay, what is it about what's happening with me that I can't hear what my team is saying? What is it about my lack of flexibility in this approach that may be making it difficult for me to be responsive to my team's needs? So I would say those are two of the things that I would run right home and work on, is impulse control and empathy, because they are two of the best things. Are there any free, legitimate online assessments? So I'm not saying this just because I want to make money, because I just charge people for the cost of the assessment. But the assessments are psychometrically sound, so they've been tested and retested, and well, when they're scored based on a number of different things. So each of my clients gets scored based on their gender, their kind of the population sample. And so it's hard to say what's good out there that would be free and legitimate. That doesn't mean that it isn't worth poking around and seeing what's out there and getting a sense of things, but I can't recommend any free or legitimate ones. Now, what I can say is, if you take a look at some of the authors I mentioned, they have in some of their books these little checklists that you might be able to use. And I would say that if it's in a Daniel Goleman book, or in the I think it was Book and Stern book, then those are like little checklists that you might be able to use. So I would say that's probably the way to think about it. I think I've answered the question that popped up.
I think that was the last question. Thank you again, Adriane. This has been so insightful. I definitely appreciate it. I'm definitely high on empathy. Oh, go for it.
There's one more question here. Are there any assessments that we could direct one to? So you typically have to be assessed by someone who's licensed, because these are psychometric assessments. And so there are multiple ones though. There's the EQI 2.0, that's what I offer. The Daniel Goleman's work, I just forgot the name of it just that quickly. So I would say you can find assessments where you can get them administered through a place that is actually licensed to do it. And you don't always have to work with a person. So I would say the one thing you want to look for is an assessment through a licensed provider. Okay, that was it.
I think that's it. Yeah, we've gone over just slightly, so I want to make sure that everyone is able to take their break in between the next session. And I hope to see you all in another one of our mini workshops. We have 8 more to go. Again, Dr. Johnson Williams, you've been a joy, of course, as always. Thank you again for joining us. And again, I hope you all stick around for the next couple of workshops. And of course, I'll see you all again tomorrow. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.